The soft amber glow of the sunset progressively illuminated the white walls of Melissa Carter's modest residence. The serene melody was created by the steady hum of the ceiling fan, which blended with the faint rustle of foliage outside in the stillness. However, the tranquility of Melissa's study was disturbed by an enigmatic, disconcerting presence that lingered in the air. She stood before her easel, her fingertips trembling as they grasped a paintbrush, despite the fact that no stroke had yet been applied to the unfinished canvas. Melissa's softly curled brown hair, which cascaded over her shoulders, resembled a statue that had been preserved in time. Her face was illuminated by the desk lamp, which accentuated her profound, shadowed eyes, which were laden with fragments of memories that she had long endeavored to suppress. She was uncertain as to whether the entrance to the room was intentionally left slightly ajar or if it was an accident. Melissa exhaled deeply and placed the paintbrush on the table. Her hand stroked over the collar of her thin blouse, as if striving to remove the heaviness that clung to her skin. A relentless and overwhelming wave of emptiness erupted within her, erasing any semblance of focus. She was incapable of painting. She was unable to concentrate. She was unable to alleviate the emptiness that possessed her. Melissa's gaze shifted to the window as she reclined in her chair, passing the faintly lit street that led to the tranquil neighborhood beyond. Lucas, her ex-husband's younger sibling, had previously indicated that he would be returning home late tonight. His absence provided her with the seclusion she believed she desired, the type of silence she believed she valued. However, she was unable to refute the peculiar solace that his presence provided. Her loneliness was somehow alleviated by the steady rhythm of his footfall as they traversed the residence. Absent-mindedly, her hand touched the silver bracelet on her wrist, which was a gift from her ex-husband. His calculated smile, the honeyed lies, the eventual betrayal as his image surfaced unbidden, her eyes briefly closed. Melissa took a deep breath, but it felt shallow, as if her thorax had contracted. She murmured to herself, "It's all in the past," but the words provided no genuine solace. And then faintly there it was, the faintest sound of movement in the hallway just outside her door. Melissa's heartbeat increased as her eyes opened. Someone or something had recently passed by. She attempted to disregard the sound, assuming that it was the wind. However, as her attention shifted to the door, she observed it moving slowly and purposefully, as if it were being prodded open by an unseen hand. The diffuse light that spilled in from the living room framed Lucas' silhouette as he stood in the doorway. His youthful face, which was sharp and defined, exhibited an expression that was both disquieting and familiar. Melissa's spine was chilled as he fixed his gaze on her, not by accident, but with deliberate intention, as his brilliant eyes conveyed an unspoken message. "Lucas." The charged silence was interrupted by her voice, which wavered. "Have you already returned?" He nodded, but he refrained from looking aside. A door. It was accessible. Lucas spoke tenderly, his voice low but clear, as if to justify his presence. "I believed you required something." Nevertheless, Melissa was aware. Her presence had been observed by him. He had observed her vulnerability, the disquiet she had endeavored to conceal, and perhaps even the yearning she had fought to suppress. Despite the passage of only seconds, the silence between them was laden with an eternity's worth of tension. Melissa gingerly rose from her chair, taking a tentative step toward the door. However, her feet felt as though they were anchored to the floor. The air appeared to be denser and more charged, as if the room had become a prison for everything they were too afraid to acknowledge. She coerced a smile, a feeble attempt at normalcy. However, Lucas's piercing gaze appeared to reveal every facade she had attempted to conceal. She stated, "It is nothing," her voice hollow and devoid of emotion, even to her own hearing. Lucas acknowledged the words she spoke by faintly inclining his head. However, his expression indicated that he was uncertain. His gaze was elongated for an excessive amount of time, as if he were struggling to articulate a truth that he was not yet prepared to address. Then, without uttering another word, he turned and strolled away. Melissa's pulse continued to pound in the wake of his departure, and she remained frozen. Although the hallway beyond her door had ceased to be audible, the charged atmosphere continued to permeate the room, exerting an invisible burden on her. Melissa knew with a chilling surety that whatever had begun tonight would not end here, as something had shifted, unspoken but undeniable. Melissa closed the door to her study after Lucas departed, but the oxygen in the room still felt suffocated in her chest. She leaned against the door, her hands trembling as they brushed against her chest, attempting to regulate her respiration. However, nothing was effortless. Like a painting that has been smeared beyond recognition, her emotions surged within her, tumultuous and untamed. Her gaze was unfocused as it drifted to the small yard outside as she moved toward the window. Old memories infiltrated, uninvited yet overwhelming in their clarity. She envisioned herself as a younger woman, her softly curled hair cascading over her shoulders as she stood in this very residence. However, she was not alone at that time. James, her ex-husband, had once entered this space as if it were his permanent home. They had once been infatuated. Melissa had been under the impression that she would spend the remainder of her life with James. She was captivated by his intelligence, charisma, and zest for life from the moment they first encountered him. Melissa had sacrificed everything for him, forsaking a promising career in interior design in order to marry him and establish a family. At that time, she was under the impression that she had everything. However, those years had been nothing more than a fleeting fantasy. James was not the individual he seemed to be. Melissa discovered his infidelity after 3 years of marriage. Initially, it was the insignificant things that troubled him: hurriedly terminated phone calls and enigmatic text messages that illuminated his screen. Subsequently, she came to the realization that she was merely one of numerous names on his inventory of significant individuals when she resolved to confront the truth one evening. Melissa vividly recalled the day she confronted James in this very residence. His eyes betrayed no remorse, only a faint hint of arrogance, as if he were under the impression that she would absolve him because she had no other option. However, she refrained from doing so. Melissa elected to depart. Despite the fact that her heart had been shattered, she carried with her the unbearable agony she had never known she could endure. The divorce did not merely deprive her of the love she had once trusted. It undermined her self-assurance. Her gaze shifted from the yard to her work table, where her unfinished paintings were dispersed. Art had become her solitary refuge following the divorce. Each brushstroke was her attempt to articulate the truth that she was unable to articulate. However, the wounds that had been inscribed in her heart were not entirely mended by art. And then Lucas entered her existence. Lucas, James's younger sibling, initially appeared to be a temporary arrangement when he moved in with her. He required lodging during his apprenticeship, and she was unable to decline due to their cordial relationship. However, Melissa's anxiety increased as he continued to remain. Her recollection of Lucas was not his physical appearance, but rather the inconsequential details that reminded her of James. He moved with a quiet yet decisive grace, and his head tilted when he was immersed in thought. However, Lucas was not James. He was unique, youthful, ardent, and hazardous in a manner that Melissa had never foreseen. The manner in which Lucas regarded Melissa was even more distressing. In contrast to James's calculating gaze, Lucas's eyes appeared to be in quest of a deeper, concealed aspect of herself, a part of herself that she was uncertain she wanted to reveal. He brought with him a sense of familiarity that felt foreign, a paradox that left her feeling unmoored. Melissa returned to the easel, her fingertips brushing against the unfinished canvas. She desired to paint in order to disengage from the maelstrom of memories. However, she was unable to do so. Recalling Lucas's gaze, she felt her palms tremble as it lingered, unspoken yet undeniably present. While she was unable to comprehend the events, Melissa was aware of one thing in her heart of hearts. Lucas was not the issue. She was. She was entangled in a spiral that she was uncertain she could escape due to her own loneliness and unhealed wounds. The lines between what was real and what was not appeared to be blurred as the shadows of her past intertwined with the light of her present. A single truth, however, was unmistakable and acute. Lucas's presence had reawakened a part of her that she had previously suppressed. Melissa was uncertain about her ability to manage it at this point. Melissa closed the door to her study, but the tension from Lucas's gaze persisted, spreading like a silent wave that clung to her. She approached the kitchen at a leisurely pace, hoping to find some measure of tranquility amid the tranquil evening. She poured herself a glass of red wine, the rich liquid swirling in warm hues under the dim light as the gentle clink of glass filled the air. However, her spirit remained cold, encased in a maze of emotions that she was unable to untangle. Lucas, his broad shoulders dominating the kitchen doorway, abruptly appeared. "Are you still awake?" he inquired with a subdued voice, as if he was apprehensive about disturbing the delicate tranquility. Melissa turned, and the instant her eyes met his, an inexplicable tension appeared to grip the space between them. His gaze remained fixed on her for an excessive amount of time. She replied quickly, gesturing toward the bottle of wine on the counter. "I needed some quiet. Would you like a glass?" Lucas entered the building with a bow. Melissa could not help but observe the faint warmth emanating from him and the way the soft kitchen light deepened the intensity of his eyes as the space between them diminished with each step he took. She presented him with a glass, but her hand trembled slightly as his fingertips touched hers. "Are you in good health?" Lucas inquired, his tone composed but tinged with subdued apprehension. His gaze was sincere and not probing, and it caused Melissa to feel as though she were standing under a spotlight. Her closely guarded thoughts were disclosed. She attempted to regain her balance by taking a small stride back. She stated, "I am fine," although her tone did not convey the conviction she had desired. Lucas maintained his gaze. "I am uncertain about that." Although his words were soothing, they were accompanied by a weight that was impossible to disregard. "Since earlier today, I have been plagued by the sensation that something shifted between us." Melissa's gaze shifted to his, and for a brief moment it appeared as though time had been suspended. "Lucas, we should not. We should refrain from discussing this matter." The wall she had spent so much time constructing was barely held together by the words that trembled in her voice. However, Lucas continued to advance, reducing the distance between them to a mere breath. "If we should not, why am I unable to cease thinking about you? Furthermore, why are you unable to divert your attention from me?" Melissa was rendered mute by his inquiry and the intensity of his gaze. She experienced the sensation of being precariously balanced on the precipice of a precarious line, torn between her convictions regarding what was morally correct and her heart's yearning for something else. Lucas did not pursue the matter any further. However, the sincerity in his gaze was more powerful than any words could ever be. Sincerity, intimacy, and an even deeper quality that she was unable to articulate were present. Melissa spoke gently, "Lucas, you are significantly younger than I am." Nevertheless, she was aware that the words were intended for her rather than for him as soon as they were spoken. "I am anxious to avoid making an error." Lucas responded with an unwavering intonation, "Age is irrelevant to me. What is of importance is my own emotions as well as those that I am confident you share." Melissa was unable to locate an answer, and she lowered her head. However, Lucas's gaze remained unwavering when she eventually looked up. It remained unyielding, balmy, and steady, silently assuring her that everything would be fine if she could simply relinquish her anxiety. Melissa refrained from speaking at that precise moment. She merely felt. The warmth of Lucas's breath drew nearer, and his presence, like a tempest, quietly unraveled every defense she had attempted to maintain. However, the moment did not culminate in an explosion. Rather, it persisted, unhurried, like a single note suspended in the air. Melissa was uncertain as to what lay ahead, but she was also aware that she lacked the fortitude to flee the truth. She could no longer resist the allure of this, whatever it might evolve into. Melissa's hands were clenched firmly together in her study, as if she were attempting to prevent the torrent of emotions within her from erupting. She sat motionless, The unfinished painting in front of her was illuminated by the gentle glow of her desk lamp. However, the muted colors on the canvas were unable to conceal the confusion that was raging in her mind. Lucas's image persisted. The certainty in his voice, the closeness she had experienced, and his penetrating gaze. A level of intimacy that she had not experienced in years of being isolated. She endeavored to suppress the emotions, but they persisted within her, akin to a flame that intensified the more she endeavored to extinguish it. She abruptly stood, intending to ladle another glass of wine to steady herself. However, a gentle knock at the door halted her in her tracks. Her chest contracted. Melissa did not require to inquire about the individual on the other side. She was already aware. She was most apprehensive about this. Her voice was wavering as she said, "Come in," as if she was uncertain about saying the words. Lucas emerged as the door squeaked open. The softness in his expression and the pointed angles of his jawline were emphasized by the faint light from the hallway behind him, which cast shadows across his face. A peculiar combination of vulnerability and fortitude. He refrained from intervening immediately. Rather, he leaned against the doorframe, his gaze fixated on hers. Melissa could sense the air between them becoming heavy, dense with unspoken tension that seemed to press down on her chest, despite the fact that neither of them spoke at that instant. Lucas finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence like a murmur through the stillness. "I couldn't sleep." "You are also not resting." Melissa attempted a smile, but it fizzled almost immediately. She was aware that Lucas could perceive it without any obstacles. "No, I required a brief period of solitude." Lucas entered the room and gingerly closed the door behind him. He did not utter another word. However, the manner in which he approached her, approaching slowly and deliberately, caused Melissa's heart rate to increase. Her body pressed against the edge of the work table as she took an instinctive step back. Her hands closely gripped its surface, as if it were the sole source of stability in the presence of the emotions that threatened to consume her. Lucas stated, "You are endeavoring to prevent this," his gaze never departing from hers. "However, this only serves to exacerbate my desire to approach." Melissa opened her mouth with the intention of uttering something, anything, but the words would not form. Lucas was standing directly in front of her before she could speak, and she could feel the subtle warmth of his breath. His eyes swept over hers, as if in search of the answers to the queries she was unable to articulate. "Lucas," she murmured, her voice breaking under the weight of her own uncertainty. "We can't." "Why not?" Lucas inquired with a subdued yet insistent tone. "Is it because I am Lucas? Is it because I am James's brother? Or is it due to your apprehension of experiencing emotions that you are hesitant to acknowledge?" His words penetrated her defenses, striking at the very foundation of the barrier she had constructed for an extended period. Melissa was unable to respond. For the first time, she did not attempt to conceal herself when her eyes met his. In the absence of denial or rejection, there was only vulnerability and a silent, unspoken surrender. Lucas extended his hand and gently touched her cheek with his fingers. The touch was delicate, yet it roused a feeling within her that she had suppressed for an excessive amount of time. Lucas' voice was now warm and soothing, almost like a promise as he said softly, "I don't want to hurt you. However, I am unable to cease." Melissa's pulse was pounding, imploring her to confront the reality she had been evading, despite the fact that she felt as though her feet were firmly planted on the ground. She recognized that her life would be irreparably altered if she permitted this to transpire. However, she also recognized that she lacked the fortitude to continue evading it. Lucas then leaned in before reason could intervene. The initial kiss was tentative, akin to a wave delicately brushing against the shore, but it conveyed the force of everything they had been suppressing. Melissa was unable to resist as his arms encircled her midsection, drawing her in closer. She experienced a sensation of liberation that she had not experienced in years, as all feelings of guilt, dread, and doubt dissipated. The stillness that ensued seemed to envelop the diminutive chamber as if it were holding its breath. Lucas's eyes were fixed on Melissa's, unwavering and steady as if anticipating her response when they eventually parted ways. Melissa was unaware of the duration of the kiss. Melissa said quietly, her voice scarcely audible, "There is no turning back after this." Lucas responded with a firm and resolute intonation, "I do not wish to return." "Are you aware of this?" Melissa declined to respond, however it was unnecessary for her to do so. All that she was unable to articulate was conveyed through her gaze. In that instant, she was aware that no matter what lay ahead, no matter how ambiguous or complex it might become, this was something that neither of them could deny any longer. The following morning, sunlight delicately filtered through the gaps in the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room, as if to alleviate the residual chaos from the previous night. Melissa's eyes opened and she inhaled each slow, deliberate inhalation. The house's silence was so profound that she could hear the chirping of birds outside the window, yet everything was far from quiet in her consciousness. Her gaze drifted absent-mindedly toward the pure blue sky visible through the window as she sat up. The experience of last night was reminiscent of a dream, as it was a maelstrom of emotions that had carried her far from the principles she had cherished for so long. However, a weight has settled in her chest as the dawning of reality has restored her sense of perspective. She contemplated whether the information they had disclosed was an error, or if it was, in fact, precisely what she had always required but had never been willing to confront. Melissa's thoughts were interrupted by a gentle groan at the door. A slight opening in the door allowed Lucas to enter, still donning the same t-shirt and jeans as the previous evening. His expression was characterized by a subtle intensity, as if he were attempting to resolve a significant matter. When their eyes met, he halted, a momentary flutter of uncertainty crossing his visage before being replaced by determination. Lucas addressed Melissa with a gentle yet unwavering tone. "I require information. Do you harbor any remorse?" His inquiry was akin to a probe that penetrated her thoughts. Melissa sat in silence, endeavoring to discover an answer within herself. Regret? False. She did not harbor any remorse. However, she was unable to deny the fear that had begun to consume her, the fear that the delicate bond between them might be shattered by the events that had transpired, and the fear that she might be wounded again as she had been in the past. Melissa's voice trembled slightly as she began to speak. "Lucas, I am not remorseful, however I am apprehensive. I am apprehensive that we are approaching a point from which we will be unable to recover, and I am concerned that this could result in harm to both of us." Lucas approached her with an unwavering focus. "Are you of the opinion that the emotions we experience are incorrect? Are you of the opinion that the events that transpired were not genuine?" Melissa shook her head. "No, however, this does not imply that we should persist. Lucas, you are so youthful. You have the entirety of your existence ahead of you. And I?" Her voice quivered, as if the words she was uttering were too agonizing to speak aloud. Lucas sat beside her, his hands tenderly clasping hers. "Do you truly believe that I am interested in any of that? Regarding age? About the past? Regarding any other matter? You are the sole object of my affection. I am aware that you are also experiencing it." Melissa's heart clenched as she gazed into Lucas's eyes, where she observed a combination of determination and sincerity. He was correct. She did sense it, that unbreakable bond between them, which she had never encountered with anyone else, not even in her doomed marriage. However, she also recognized that this was not an easy task and that the cost of the task they had undertaken could be substantial. "Lucas, you must comprehend." Melissa's voice softened as she stated, "This does not solely affect us. I have already suffered a significant amount of loss. I am uncertain as to whether I am willing to take the risk again." Lucas nodded, as if to acknowledge the extent of her apprehension. There was no argument, and he refrained from further pushing. Rather, he gripped her hands more tightly, his demeanor evoking a sense of tranquility and assurance that words were unable to replicate. He stated, "I will not request that you make a decision at this time. However, I am not relinquishing my resolve." "Melissa, you are entitled to pleasure, and I will demonstrate it to you." The faint glimmer of hope that flickered within Melissa was unable to be suppressed, despite her failure to respond. Lucas stood, leaving her alone in the room. He did not pressurize her or demand anything from her, and this was the most significant factor in her realization of his differences. He was not James. She had never encountered anyone like him before. Lucas did not anticipate that she would transform into an individual she was not. He merely desired for her to be herself. Restless thoughts enveloped the remainder of the day. Melissa wandered aimlessly through the house, her consciousness consumed by a tidal wave of emotions. The canvas was alive with colors that were unlike anything she had ever created before. As she painted, she is bold, chaotic, and brimming with raw emotion, much like the condition of her heart. Melissa was standing in front of the painting by the time evening arrived, her eyes tracing each stroke of the brush. That was the moment she came to the realization. She was unable to continue evading her emotions and living in dread. Lucas was sitting quietly under the dim porch light as Melissa exited her studio and entered the veranda. When he observed her, he raised his head, and a momentary expression of astonishment appeared on his face. However, it soon dissipated, and his expression became more composed and composed. Melissa sat beside him, and for a brief period, neither of them spoke. "Lucas," she finally stated, her voice gentle yet resolute. "I am uncertain about the future, but I am willing to make an effort if you are amenable." A slow, pleasant smile spread across Lucas' face as he gazed at her. He stated, "I am consistently amenable." Melissa experienced a sense of tranquility that she had not experienced in many years at that precise moment. Under the tranquil night sky, they sat side by side. Melissa was unafraid for the first time, despite the uncertainty and potential obstacles that lay ahead. This was not the conclusion. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.